My next two patients have traumatic pasts, and we could call them rescue horses. They both show symptoms of chronic lameness, and I will look at them from a more holistic point of view and see if I can make a difference. Catalina grew up in the Czech Republic and had a rough childhood. She had an accident under the age of 3 in front of a wagon, and X-rays showed that she had fractured her T3 back then. She was not her best self when she came to Switzerland, and her current owner put a lot of energy and care into her. Catalina has some lameness in her back legs, and she has a tendency to have some issues with her proprioception. Here we can see that she sometimes places her feet out of place or too far out, so I will try to balance her extremities together with her spine and her brain. I spent a lot of time freeing up Catalina's skull and poll, and here I'm working on the hyoid, addressing also the spinal cord and the meninges in her brain. Catalina carried a lot of tension right in front of her hips. I tried to release the muscles on a superficial level first, but they did not let go, so that tells me that I need to address the viscera below. I addressed the cecum underneath and tried to release any tension patterns in the organ. Horses normally show subtle signs when something's happening. During my work here, we see that her left ear starts moving back and forth as a reaction to the work I do on her inside of her skull. This is Ferro Centino, an 18-year-old thoroughbred who had a very successful career as a racehorse. He comes from a long line of racing ancestors and had a very promising career. He raced from 2 to 9 and then got retired. He had chronic sinus infections and very bad teeth. And he has a tendency to have a lameness in his right forelimb. Looking at his eyes and the tension in his face, you can already tell that he's a hyper-nervous horse and very alert and doesn't feel very safe. If he gets scared, he runs in the opposite direction and doesn't stop until he feels safe. Ferro has a tendency to place that right leg further back and underneath, so most likely there's more tension behind his right shoulder. The sinus infections he had were very serious. They had to be cut open so the pus could drain, so that for sure left him with some scarring. I see an unevenness in his ears, and I'm sure he's still suffering from some kind of headache. I started my session with him on his chest. I released the sternum and all the pectoral fibers, and then moved on to the right shoulder and gave it some time to just settle down, and I listened and followed the tension patterns of the shoulder blade. Ferro was very cooperative. He was actually holding his head very low the whole time I worked on that right side. So he started to relax into himself and obviously had no fight or flight thoughts while I was working on him. I prefer to have not even a handler and just kind of allow the horses to hang with me and be free and able to move if something doesn't feel right for them. Ferro had not much complaints about my work until I started touching the inside of his right leg and worked on his nerves. That took a little while for him to calm down and find some release in the work I did there. Then I put my attention onto the area behind his right shoulder. I released the muscles there and put some focus onto the ribs and the rib cage. Most of the session I spent on his head because I assumed that there was pain and restriction and scarring in the inside of his skull from all these years of sinus infections. I've never seen a horse who loved ear pull that much like him. We should have recorded more. He was there standing for minutes and just enjoyed getting rid of that tension inside of his head. He was so focused and surrendered completely to any work I did on his skull, and showed with little signs of release that there was still a lot of work to do to release the tension on his cranial membranes. I revisited those two horses a week later, and I was surprised what a difference the first impression of Pharaoh made when I came to see him again. He was less tense and showed way less anxiety and tension in his face. When I arrived for my session with Kilon and Star, she just came from the pasture and had a nice little grass belly. She has a very nice gait, and gait analysis did not show any visible issues, but the poor horse has a very, very sensitive skin and reacted with a full body rash and needed to be treated with steroids and painkillers for quite a while now. On top of it all, she developed mastitis in her right side. Her owner told me that Kilon Star is very fed up with all the handling and reacts very aggressively to touch. She assumed that I might not even be able to touch her because she just bit her in the chest, and the hind end is an area which nobody can touch. So it took a while until Kilon Star showed the first sign of release and put her head down, and I kept working gently from the front to the back. My intuition told me to work with her not at her usual place, because that's maybe connected to bad experiences. So I treated her in the middle of the hallway and had her facing away from the wall to allow her to make new experiences with touch. The most important part for me was to get her deep trust. People often just do too much. They rub and scratch, and they don't really pay attention to the horse's reaction and to see if they even like it. So I was holding the sternum and the withers connected through the diaphragm and just created space for the lymphatic system to increase the drainage of toxins. Earlier this year I got introduced to the horsemanship work of Warwick Schiller, and I realized that my style of bodywork can be described with his groundwork principles. He emphasizes that in order to connect with a horse, one needs to prove to the horse that they can be an attentive herd member and that they are a reliable partner in a stressful situation. So he reacts to the blink of an eye or an ear which is pointing in his direction and backs off immediately with pressure. I really like his work, and I do a similar thing with the horses I work on. As soon as the horse shows the slightest direction or glances an ear or an eye towards me, I back off and go to a place where the horse feels more comfortable. I wait until the horse relaxes into the moment and then keep approaching a tricky area again. So it's a slow and quiet process which is really respectful to the horse's feelings and emotions. I decided to play the real-time version of that part of the session just to show horse owners how important mindful touch is and how important trust is. If you interact with your horse on a more conscious level, you will have more connection with your horse and a better relationship. So try to take the doing out of your action and start listening more to your horse. It took almost 4 minutes until Kilon Star gave me a first real release with licking and chewing. So it took a while for her to completely trust me, but I was even able to touch her female parts at the end, and she trusted my touch. I was able to touch her everywhere with long, slow stripping strokes and never got threatened anymore. So now it's up to the owner to take the time to reconnect with her horse in this way, and I'm sure in the long run this will calm her nervous system, and then slowly she can get off the steroids.